and welcome to another episode of Orthodox Family Life. Today we're talking about Halloween. So, there's a lot of great videos out there by different Orthodox clergy about Halloween. And I thought the thing that's missing maybe is a family's perspective on Halloween and how we navigate some of the finer points around it. So, just a quick disclaimer first of all, this video is not a history lesson. I'm not very well versed in the history of Halloween. This isn't pastoral advice. You should be asking your priest if you have certain questions. And of course, this isn't the Orthodox stance on Halloween. This is just one mom's take. So, this video is just about my experience. I'd like to share some of the guiding principles we used and navigating some of the finer points around Halloween. So the big question is, do I think Orthodox Christians should celebrate Halloween? In general, no. However, I do want to talk at the end about how to back out if you're already a family that celebrates. I do think you have to be a little bit careful about that. But in general, no, I don't think it's a good thing for Orthodox Christians to do. So why do I think that Orthodox Christians shouldn't celebrate? For me, there's simply no getting around the demonic nature of Halloween. I'd like to go over 6 different points on this, starting with the origins of Halloween. Again, I'm not a history expert on this, and the history of Halloween seems to be very muddled and complex, coming from a lot of different regions and areas, and a lot of different faiths. So that's something you can easily look into online. But for me, it's very clear that there is a strong occultic connection to Halloween and its history, its origins, and its history throughout the ages. There's also current ties to the occult that should not be overlooked. Now, if you're not someone who knows a lot about the occult or has never dabbled in it, which is myself, I've never dabbled in the occult. I've always considered myself a Christian, even when I wasn't a practicing Christian as a young person. You can be kind of ignorant on how broad the occult teachings are now and how they're pretty much everywhere. But if you listen to people who have been in the occult, you'll see that Halloween really is a special day to them. I first heard about this a little over 10 years ago. I was in a Yahoo group for Orthodox homeschoolers, and every October, of course, this issue would come up. Should you or should you not celebrate Halloween? And of course, a lot of people said, well, it's just a fun little holiday. We're not doing anything demonic. And then the other side would chime in. But there was always one or two people who had some really interesting insights because they had been raised as witches. Their mother was a witch. Their grandmother was a witch. And they had this experience that very few people have. And that is that they saw that Halloween was really a special holy day for them as witches. And there would be special services, sacrifices. Some people now are even claiming that human sacrifice takes place on Halloween. That's something you can research on, not something I know a lot about. But that clearly, if you speak to any former witches or occult people, they'll tell you that Halloween really was a special day for them. There's also Anton LaVey, who was one of the leading Satanists, if not the leading Satanist in the country, helped normalize it in this country. He has a very famous quote where he says that he's very grateful to Christians that they allow their children to worship the devil at least one day a year, being Halloween. Another thing that I see with Halloween is that the trajectory of it is always going towards being more evil, more sinister, more sexualized. So this is not the Halloween of the 80s when I grew up. Back then, there were very few really disturbing costumes or movies. It was just starting. Horror was kind of really coming into its own with things like Nightmare on Elm Street, Halloween, and the Jason movies. These were all really big at the time. But for young children, we were still pretty much sheltered from all that. There wasn't a lot geared towards younger children, and I think that's changed. I think that now a lot of the horror has trickled down into the younger years where preteens and younger children are exposed to it. Um, Halloween will never, I believe, become more innocent. I think it's always going to tend towards being um, more dark, more evil. Again, because of where it came from, because of how it's celebrated now, I just don't see any way um, for this holiday to kind of reverse its trajectory, right? So if you start now, then what Halloween looks like in 5 years is actually, I think, going to be worse than it is now. And I think we already see that. There's a lot more Halloween decorations. They're up sooner, they're up for longer, they're very dark, right? And now there's like just a ton of different recipes and for making different treats at home, right? That are very disturbing. It's always going to lean in that way. Another thing I think you should think about is that the longer you celebrate, the more difficult it is to back out. So let's say you start with your 4-year-old, you let them participate. It's very innocent. They go to grandma's for some candy or a trunk or treat at a local Protestant church. Well, you've now set them up to want to celebrate the following year, right? When they're 5 and then 6 and 7, and it keeps going. And at some point, you're going to realize that it's not the Halloween they celebrated when they were 5, right? Every year, slowly, it gets more scary, it gets more sexualized, it gets more intense. And so it becomes very hard to back out when you've already allowed it in the beginning. And again, when they're older, it's going to be Halloween for a teenager. What's available to them and what is encouraged and what they are pressured to partake in is very different than a 5-year-old, right? But if you allow the 5-year-old, they're eventually going to be the teenager. Another big issue in this area is the normalization of evil. To me, this is really the main issue with Halloween, aside from its occultic background and current use, is that it makes evil things seem like a joke, or like they're not real, or like they're entertainment. And I think we have to realize that this isn't one day a year, right? We see these things all through the month of October now. There are many, many very dark, disturbing Halloween movies that come out this time of year. Even for young children now, there's different spooky movies that come out for young children, and there's also older movies for older kids that are now have children's themes in them. There was the Winnie the Pooh this year, I think this year or last year. Winnie the Pooh went into the public domain, and so right away a horror movie was released where Winnie the Pooh was the killer, I believe, and the whole 100-acre wood was some horrible nightmare place. It also happened with the movie about the imaginary friends, right? And there was a really dark, sinister side to it. So it's actually trickling down into children's things, but it's also taking children's things and twisting them for the teenagers and the older people. And again, when we're seeing this over and over and over, of course, we begin to normalize it. We think it must be normal because we see it everywhere. So for our family, I would actually not have the kids come on most of the errands with me for all of October because of the displays that were out. They thought were very scary, like the mechanical things that will move or say something at you when you walk by. But even just the being constantly surrounded by these dark things, I don't think that's good for children. I think the church teaches us that everything we see and everything we do, everything we interact with, affects us. And so if you're familiar with monastics, you'll see that they, even when they walk around, they're looking down at the ground. They're not giving themselves all of these opportunities to be exposed to the world, right? So they look at the ground in humility, but they're also blocking out, like looking at people and having a thought about them, or anything that could lead to sinful thoughts and temptations. But here we are at Halloween, just looking at the most terrible, terrible things. And for young children, especially for sensitive children, um, it really unsettles them. And maybe as adults, we don't realize that. But for a child, these things can be incredibly scary and can stay with them. I know that as a young child, I have an older sister, and she was watching a horror movie, and I happened to see a short clip of it, and that movie stayed with me for probably a decade. Really terrified me in a way that it probably wouldn't for an older child, right? So these things are around in October. It's incredibly difficult to um, avoid them, but I think the younger your children are, the harder you should work towards avoiding this and certainly not engaging in it. The other thing I'll say about this is that a lot of this normalization is geared towards, again, thinking that it's entertainment, evil is entertainment, or it's a joke, it's not real. But we know from the lives of the saints that magic and the occult and demonic forces are real. Earlier this month, I think on October 1st, we celebrated St. Cyprian. And so I posted the story of St. Cyprian and Justina. St. Cyprian was a magician, a very well-respected and knowledgeable magician from a very young age. I believe it was 7 years old he started. He traveled all over the world. He could do many things. He was kind of the most powerful wizard at the time. And he ends up being thwarted by Justina, a young virgin, a young Christian virgin. And eventually he converts and becomes a bishop in the church, right? So we know from his story that these things are real. They happen. Of course, St. Cyprian lived many, many centuries ago, but we have modern stories too. I'm trying to start incorporating some books into my podcast to share some really good books with you. But we have here the Apostle to Zaire, the life and legacy of the Blessed Father Cosmas. He served in Africa, and in this book, you'll see that he has a lot of interactions with different people who are in the dark arts, who are into demonic things. So it's very real. We should never let our children. We don't want to scare them, of course, but we should not teach them that it's not real. It is real, and we should guard against it. And lastly, I think the other thing that is often normalized with Halloween is the sexualization of children. And so we all know that there are many, many inappropriate outfits around women's costumes, right? Whether they're nurses, doctors, firemen, for some reason they're all in mini skirts and extremely sexualized, right? If a woman is dressing up like a nurse, she's not usually in scrubs, right? It's a short skirt with a lot of sexual innuendos. But you see these costumes actually even for younger children. If you don't believe me, you can go to Google and just type in Halloween costumes for preteens. And I think for me, the third picture in the search was one of these very skimpy, short outfits for a child. So like a 10 or 11-year-old. These things exist. And even if you're not seeing them in your local Target or wherever you're buying your outfits, if you go down the costume aisle and maybe you're looking for a little princess outfit or something, right? You're still going to pass by the adult outfits, which will, I guarantee you, will be extremely inappropriate and sexualized. So your child is still seeing these things. They are still normalized to believe that that's how grown-ups dress up, that that's what they should emulate, that's what they should strive for. And of course, this is the last thing we want for our children. It may seem that I'm being an alarmist with this, but what I see is that there is a constant slow drip of this stuff, whether it's the sexualization of children or the normalization of evil in all forms, whether it's movies, books, clothing, accepting of different lifestyles and alternative lifestyles. It's everywhere. And I think sometimes the adults don't see it because we've been desensitized to it. Things that would have stood out to us in the 80s and 90s no longer stand out to us because we're just used to it everywhere. And I want you to think about what that must be like for the children who weren't around when these things weren't everywhere, right? And so we have to help them have an actual normal childhood by keeping these things far away from them. One last thing I would share with you is there's a book I ran across. It came out about 10 years ago. I don't think it's still in print, but you can find it at Amazon. It's called Innocent Fun or Insidious Threat, an Orthodox Parent's Guide to Protecting Our Families from the Real Dangers of Today. And it doesn't speak necessarily about Halloween in particular, but it does talk about, let's see if I can show that to you. It does talk about kind of this family of issues of different things that are coming through, whether violence in video games or sexualization of children, what's in the books that the children are reading. It kind of covers everything. And I think when you see how pervasive these things are, how they are across different, so they're not just in movies, right? They're in the movies, they're in the books, they're on the kids' lunch boxes, right? They're being taught in the schools. They're encountering these ideas and these images across a variety of mediums. And so you really have to understand that and do your best to give them a pure childhood where they only see good things or holy things, right? Or as much as possible do this. So when I was looking at the other videos about Halloween, and mainly the people who do celebrate Halloween, I couldn't really find any good reasons that they gave for celebrating Halloween. This was really important to me because as a teenager, I really had this feeling that I wanted to live my life intentionally. I didn't want to go along with the flow. If I did something, I wanted it to be because I believed in it and because I felt like it was the right thing to do. And I looked around and I saw that I felt like so many people were maybe in a daze almost, just doing what the crowd did, right? And I wanted to live differently. And so I could only really find two reasons that people gave that they believe that you should celebrate Halloween or could celebrate Halloween. And forgive my camera, it seems to be going in and out of focus here. So one is that Halloween is fun. That's the reason why you should celebrate it. It's fun. And that you should be making memories together as a family and having fun together. So I absolutely believe that you should be making memories together as a family. You should have fun together. You should work together, pray together, have some leisure time together. This is a well-rounded family that does all of these things. But do you need Halloween to do that? And I don't believe you do. There's nothing special about the day of Halloween that gives us something that every other day of the year cannot. Now, there's a really great video by Father Savas Agiritis or Father Savas the Athonite. I've linked it down below on my channel on a created playlist. I believe the playlist is called Spiritual Talks. So it's Father Savas. And the name of the talk is The Christian Holiday. Now, this talk is in Greek, but I promise you it's worth it to listen to or to read the subtitles. He goes over how Christian families should be spending their free time. That just because we're having fun doesn't mean we should be engaging in sin. Families should have leisure time together, but it should be wholesome, good things. So this would include things like picnics or hiking, doing puzzles together, reading together, making something together. There's a whole long, rich list of things you can do with your family that are fun and that will allow you to spend time together. But it should always be holy things, right? Not something sinful. And so we just have to make sure that our fun times still align with our Orthodox Christian values. Now, the second thing I've heard for reasons to celebrate is that it's part of American culture or part of American tradition, and that you should try to fit in. This also hit me really hard because when I was growing up in the late 80s and early 90s, I actually got into the alternative punk rock scene. And one of the things that that taught me was that it was okay to be different. If you've heard my story, you know that I already felt very different on the inside, and being in the alternative scene really helped me to also feel different on the outside and to kind of express what I was already feeling in interiorly. And so I got really comfortable with being different. And sometimes it was really hard. Sometimes people would say really nasty things to you. As a young girl, you know, wearing an army jacket and Doc Martens, I had guys coming up and just saying, "You're really ugly, aren't you?" Really nasty things, right? When you're different, especially in the 80s, where it was a very consumerist culture. It was very much everybody has to be the same. Unlike today, which I think allows for a lot more subculture in some ways. Um, and so, this whole idea of fitting in for me is really important. I think that that time in the alternative scene really helped me to embrace being different as an Orthodox Christian. If you're an Orthodox Christian, you're going to be counterculture. You're not going to fit in. I don't think you can live an authentically Orthodox life and fit into the culture. Our culture now is um, so different in every way, right? Um, if you keep the fast on Friday and everybody else wants to go out to a restaurant, right, and they're sharing plates or there's nothing on the menu that you can eat, right? You're going to stick out, right? You're going to stick out when Pascha's on a different date. You're going to stick out when you fast for Lent or for Advent. You're going to stick out when you make your cross, when um, you know, bless your food before you eat at work or at school. Being an Orthodox Christian, you're going to stick out even if you don't try to. And you can try to be discreet with your faith just so you're not trying to, you know, be pharisaical and shout it on the rooftops. But you're still going to stick out to some degree, and people are going to think you're weird. I've had this many, many times. I homeschooled my children, and we were mostly in a Protestant group. Lovely, lovely Protestant women. Many of them I'm still friends with, but we always knew that we were um, on the outside of that group, right? That we weren't one of them, and that's okay. We learned to deal with that. So I actually think this is an incredibly helpful thing to teach your children, that we're counterculture people. We don't go along with the flow, right? We go along with the church. We go along with our Lord. And so if you are worried about fitting in, that's really something you need to work on. I think it's not good for kids to give up what is right for fitting in, right? And this is the struggle often of a lot of preteens and teenagers. They want to fit in. And so we have to give them a lot of support and love and help and find other people in the church that they can fit in with, because it is hard for them, right? But we don't want to encourage, um, you know, giving up our beliefs for just fitting in with the culture. And so I think Halloween is a really wonderful opportunity to teach them that it's okay to not fit in, that we're never going to fit in. The saints didn't fit in. Um, and we want to be like them. So were we the only ones celebrating? I'm sorry, were we the only ones not celebrating Halloween? In most of our circles, yes. In our Protestant kind of homeschool circle, a lot of our friends did the trunk or treat. In our parish, I think we were the only ones not celebrating at that time. It was difficult, right? So what do you do if you're not celebrating? I think you have different options depending on your location, whether or not your church offers something for you. Some churches do like a prayer service followed by a fun thing for the kids. We never had that, so that wasn't an option for us. Some places have little fun nights together where they do board games or, you know, little fun movies. And some people just ignore it. That was kind of our take for a long time. Our kids had plenty of play clothes. They were dressed up most days of the week, actually. So dressing up wasn't unique or something only once a year. They did that all the time. We lived in a neighborhood where we would get trick-or-treaters, so we would just hunker down in the back and maybe watch a fun movie or play some games, and just so we didn't hear the doorbell going off all the time. So I did work to make them feel not left out. We just did something different. We were choosing not to participate, and we still did something fun and different. Now, if you're out in the country like I am now, it's probably going to pass by. And if you're raising your kids from the beginning to not celebrate, it may not ever be a problem. It might not, um, it's probably not a conversation you even have to have with them. So it all depends on your location and how you navigate the not celebrating part. Now, as I mentioned in the beginning, there is a certain situation I wanted to address, and that is if you're new to the church and you have elementary age kids who have been celebrating Halloween, or if you've been Orthodox for a while and now you've changed your mind and you don't want to celebrate. So how do you back out once you have been celebrating and your children are kind of at that age where they still really love it? So I first want to say that this is not a situation I've had to deal with, so you can take this advice with a grain of salt, of course. But first and foremost, you really should talk to your spouse and your priest about this. I think what you want to avoid is setting up the dynamic of the church isn't letting us do this fun thing, right? Or we became Orthodox and now we're no longer fun. I think that's what you want to avoid. And so depending on the ages of your kids and their feelings around Halloween, their feelings around the church, how connected they are to the church. Some children come in and really embrace the church. And some kids are a little bit more standoffish and they're unsure. And so depending on where your kids are, you might have to navigate that over several years. Maybe you're not, able to just shut the whole thing down in year one. But I would encourage you to at least take out anything that's clearly demonic, anything clearly inappropriate, right? Start there. And then work on building those other fun days with them so that they have other fun things that they do. And so missing Halloween is not that big of a deal. But this really does take a lot of prayer. If you're already in this situation, a lot of prayer, discuss it with your spouse, your priest, and I think your children too, and just let them know, look, I made a mistake. I would like us to change how we're doing this and explain to them why. Again, depending on their age and where they're at. But you can always replace it too with fun things. So lastly, I just want to say, kind of going back to Father Salvas's talk, again, that's linked down below in a created playlist called Spiritual Talks, and the talk is called The Christian Holiday. We don't want to give our kids the impression that the church isn't fun or celebratory, right? There's a lot of joy in the church. We don't really use the word fun so much, but there is a lot of joy and a lot of goodness in celebrating, right? And so try to have these celebrations on the feasts of the church. We have 12 major feast days, and then we have several minor feast days, a lot of major saints days. There's also the children's name days. All these should be festal days. So for many of these days, we wouldn't do schoolwork. We would have a special meal or a special dessert. We'd go out to a museum or have a picnic, a hike, go canoeing. You can make the day fun. And so if you're doing this throughout the year with a whole bunch of church holidays where you go to church first and then you celebrate for the rest of the day, I don't think Halloween is going to stand out as some big deal that they're missing because they're used to doing fun things. It's not like you only do the fun things, on Halloween. So I think this is really important. It's really important that we lean into celebrating the feast of the church and let these other things that are part of our culture that don't align with our values as Orthodox Christians, just let them fall away over time. So I hope you guys found this helpful. Again, this is just my opinion about Halloween, one of many opinions out here on the internet. So take it for what it's worth, just one mom's opinion. But I hope you enjoyed this video. Let me know what you think about Halloween down below. And until next time, God bless you all.